The research has shown that there's actually 2 distinctly different styles of desire that nobody has really told us about.
I've never heard this
Right?
before.
Yeah.
I'm interested.
I know. The same way the clitoris was just found.
Right. We discovered massive components of the clitoris and 2 desire arousal stages. What are they called?
2 different desire styles.
Desire
and
styles.
The more recent research is actually showing that there's 4 different arousal styles.
Oh my goodness. Buckle up, ladies. If you are a woman who's thinking about getting pregnant, a woman who is pregnant, or you are someone who has ever carried any number of babies in your uterus, you are going to want to lean in. Today, we have a leading expert in sex therapy sharing secrets about the difference between desire and arousal. And you will learn practical tips on how to get the most out of your sex life today. So the Painless Pregnancy Podcast welcomes Rachel Smith.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It's absolutely an honor.
Thank you for coming.
Yes.
I'm super excited. We have such fabulous synergy with our roles in serving this population.
Oh, it's so important.
Yeah. So I'd love it if you could introduce yourself and kind of give the background of who you are and what you do.
Perfect. So my name is Rachel Smith. I'm the founder of Infinite Intimacy, where I help couples and women find a deeper, more magnetic and fulfilling connection with themselves and their partners. So I'm actually a licensed marriage and family therapist with a certification in sex therapy, and I'm also an intimacy coach. So I just love working with women. I love working with couples to really just help them find that vibrancy and that connection, right? I think when people hear the word intimacy, they equate it to one thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Penetrative intercourse, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So if we hear the word intimacy and we equate that with sex, and if we hear the word sex and we equate that with penetration and intercourse, right? Then that only gives us one way to be intimate, right? And so that really pigeonholes us, and it kind of locks us in and really creates this tension-filled space between couples, because it's like we're putting all of our eggs in one basket, right? So then the relationship becomes very fragile at that point.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yes, I can see that leading to fragility.
Yes.
Because truly, if you're not successful in that one category,
Exactly.
You're broken.
Exactly. Yeah. And let's not even talk about the orgasm, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yes. Unless you're joking with your girlfriends about how it doesn't happen.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Then you can talk about it. Anything outside of that, people will think like, we don't actually say that out loud.
Right.
So.
Right. Exactly. And then we think if we're not having an orgasm, there's something wrong with us. Right.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So all of these just the misinformation, the lack of education, it really just puts women, especially in a space where we're feeling broken. We're feeling like there's something wrong with us. And especially when their partners are maybe wanting sex or intimacy a little bit more, but then moms, young moms, new moms, just, they're so touched out and don't even want their partners to touch them. And there's so much that goes into it. So I'm so excited we're going to dive into this today.
Yes.
But Dr. Kat, please, can you share a little bit about your specialty? Because this synergy is so real.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Yep. So I am a doctor of physical therapy, and my team and I, we specialize in pregnant and postpartum women. So we frequently encounter not only your pregnancy pain, discomforts, difficulty walking, peeing your pants, or passing gas or poop when you don't want to.
Right.
But this category of sexual dysfunction is massive for our population.
Yes.
So,
and we're not talking about it.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We have it on our intake form. So when you become a patient with us, we inquire about it, whether you report it or not.
Good.
And even still, Rachel, I find that some women will almost hold on to that for a few sessions. They're even more okay with saying, I pee my pants when I sneeze, versus I really used to have wonderful orgasms and now I don't. So we do a couple sessions, work on the pelvic floor, and then they might be like, ask me for a friend. I also heard that orgasms can be less pleasurable postpartum.
Right.
And I'm like, yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Like, we can talk about that.
Right. Exactly.
So maybe if I could lay out from the physical point of view, the components that we can coach our moms on.
Yes.
And then I'd love for you to complement that.
Absolutely.
Because for me, as a physical therapist, I am able to understand what the structures themselves do. And when I educate women on that, and I can, again, like coach them through some strategies that from a physical standpoint will typically result in physical arousal.
Yes.
They feel empowered and they're like, okay, yeah, I can do that.
Perfect.
There's definitely still like this missing component.
Yes.
Or it's, you know, the relationship is absolutely interwoven into that intimacy, right? Like it is an expression of the relationship.
Yeah.
So for us as physical therapists, when a woman says, say she's postpartum, whether it's a vaginal delivery or a C-section, and she reports pain with intercourse, our first step is to stratify this and say, okay, does it hurt with penetration or with deep thrusting? Because we know before successful penetration can occur, the vaginal space has to go through a few physical changes.
Yep.
So we're coaching her on one time, giving yourself time, and I usually use the phrase making out, because that's what we called it back in 6th grade.
Sure, yeah.
Make sure you have enough time to make out with your partner,
Yes.
fool around.
Yes.
And they'll be like, I'm sorry, I'm married.
Right.
I don't know if you know,
Yeah,
but like
yeah.
married with kids,
Don't
you
have
don't
time.
typically make out. You
Nope.
typically are just
Yeah.
like, okay, we have 5 minutes, go.
Let's go. Yeah.
So I'll say, great, because that adds to the recipe of having painful or unsuccessful intercourse. So, all right, let me encourage you to have playtime.
Yep.
Ideally for the female body, we want to hit that 20-minute mark.
Yes.
And you should notice a few changes.
Yes.
One, your vulvar space. So
Yes. Let's see it.
let's take her out.
Yes.
So these tissues of your vulva, which by the way, they can look any way. There's no like correct outer lips are bigger than the inner lips. There's just, it can look however it's going to look.
Yeah. Every vulva is created beautifully and uniquely and divinely beautiful and different, just like a penis. Every
Absolutely.
penis looks different.
Yeah.
Every vulva looks different.
And just like our faces.
Yeah.
Like there's no same
Yeah, and just like
face.
our faces, maybe one eye is a little bit smaller than the other, right?
Yeah.
One lip might be a little bit, you know?
Yes.
It doesn't have to be perfectly proportioned.
It's so
not like
true.
what you see on the screens.
It's so true. Yeah. Full permission that
Yeah,
your vulva
yeah.
can look however it looks. Yes. So we tell them that once they've been playing around with their partner intimately for about
Revved up.
20 minutes,
Yep.
yeah, they should see that these tissues are more swollen.
Yes.
This also might appear that the hole or the space of the vaginal opening is more visible. So you could even see that the lips are parting. You'll notice self-lubrication. So you should have fluid or you should be wet in that area.
Sure.
The other thing that happens is that vaginal tenting. So the tube of the vagina, the birth canal, it goes from this flat tube to an erect, heck yeah, look at us.
This is my vulva.
Yeah, I love your stuffy here.
You're saying that this comes up,
Yes.
right?
Uh-huh.
So if this is the vulva, if we can just,
Yeah.
you know, for
Love it.
language, right? So the vulva is everything that we can see.
Yeah.
Right? The problem with referring to everything down there as the vagina is that we are literally disregarding our pleasure center, which is our clitoris,
Yeah,
right? And our
absolutely.
clitoris has 10,000 nerve endings. It is the only sexual organ that's not made for reproduction. It is purely there for our pleasure.
Yeah.
Right. And so we need to pay attention to that. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But when we refer to the vagina, we're referring to the vaginal canal. So
Yes.
this is so this vaginal canal then wraps around the
Yes.
clitoris.
Yes. Yes. That is the
Yes.
internal clitoris. I didn't even learn about that as a pelvic floor therapist until maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Yep.
Wild.
Well, it was found in the late 90s and first published in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
So the reality is pleasure for women hasn't been a point of focus or even really
Right.
cared about until women started stepping into research. So
Right.
this
Right.
is why these conversations are so important, because we're here to help you tap into your pleasure because you are so deserving of it, and we wouldn't have a full structure
Right.
meant
Yes.
for it if this wasn't as important as what it needs to be. So I'm so excited. I think we're
Yeah.
here.
Thank you for that. That was perfect. So yeah, that's us. We look for that vaginal tenting. We look for the tissues that you can see to be more swollen and plump and open. And we expect that pelvic floor, the musculature,
Yes.
to be soft and lengthened.
Nice.
The muscles cannot be tight
Nope.
for successful penetration.
Or orgasm.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because they have to be long so that they can contract.
Exactly.
If they're already in a shortened state, they have
Yes.
no contractile
Nowhere to go.
ability.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So that is us.
Yes.
Now, that's as far as like, this is what we expect physically to change on your body
Right.
during a successful arousal episode.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
So we can also coach them through the process of orgasm and how to maximize that from a pelvic floor perspective.
Ooh, I would love to hear that.
And before we do,
Yes.
can I ask you? So I'm curious because you have this other aspect of specialty
Yes.
that totally intertwines with the physicality.
Absolutely.
So can you speak to that as far as desire and arousal?
Absolutely. Well, first, we can't have true physical health without mental health, right?
Yeah.
And we can't have mental health without physical health, right? And there, that, synergy between our minds and our bodies, right? It's a beautiful, dance between the two, right?
Yeah.
And so it's wonderful when we're talking about, okay, these are the physical aspects of what's going on with your body, right? But then how is our mind impacting that
Yes.
response,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't know or recognize that there is a difference between desire and arousal,
Right.
right?
Yes.
In our society, we very much link those two words together in the same way we link sex and intimacy together.
Yes.
right?
Yeah. It's a good point.
Sex is one type of intimacy, right? But
Uh-huh.
there's at least 6 different ways that we can experience intimacy within our relationship.
Ooh.
And that's part of the challenge that we're experiencing within intimate relationships because we are pigeonholing ourselves, as we were talking about before,
Yeah.
right? So when we're able to take into consideration that desire and arousal are 2 distinct processes between our minds and our bodies, right?
Yep.
Then we know maybe which one we need to be a little bit more intentional about.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, I like that. Like a
And so-
diagnostic tool.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. So when we refer to desire, we're typically referring to the mental, emotional wanting of sex. And then when we refer to arousal, we're talking about the physical, physiological response to a sexual stimuli.
Yes. That makes
Right?
sense. Uh-huh.
So we can have one without the other, and we can
Yep.
have one before the other.
Oh,
Yes.
interesting.
Yes.
Okay.
And so one without the other indicates a little bit of a disconnect between our minds and our bodies, right?
Okay. Yep.
And so it can happen in both directions. And as we age, right, our bodies are slowing down. Maybe it's just not responding in the same way. Maybe I'm having some pelvic floor dysfunction where I'm really wanting sex, but then my body just isn't, getting to where it is that I want it to be, right?
Yep.
Disconnect.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, unfortunately, we do have to talk about it in terms of sexual trauma when our bodies are responding to stimulation because that's what it's wired to do, right?
Right,
But then we
right.
don't have the wanting, right? So that's why we feel very much betrayed by our bodies in those circumstances.
Gotcha. So that second one, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're referring to maybe a physical response
Right.
to sexual stimulation
Right.
in a body that doesn't feel safe
Correct.
being
Yes,
sexual.
without the desire for it.
Okay. Okay.
Right.
All right.
So that's why we need to understand that they're 2 distinct processes. My body can respond even if I don't want it.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right.
Interesting.
And so that's why even in terms of women becoming lubricated, right?
Yep.
Where you were just kind of describing once that arousal happens, right? We start seeing lubrication, but lubrication is not an indication of desire,
okay. Interesting.
right?
All right.
And that I think is where a lot of people get confused. And especially if we're talking about, relationships and heterosexual relationships, right? Where men might say, oh, well, you're wet, so you must want it, right? Like, why don't you want it? You're wet.
Interesting.
Right.
Okay.
And that's
Yes.
where we need to
I'm with you.
understand that they're 2 distinct processes,
Got it.
right?
Okay.
I can be aroused without the desire.
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. All
Okay.
right. Totally with you. Yeah.
So that's one without the other. One before the other indicates our desire style. And the research has shown that there's actually 2 distinctly different styles of desire that nobody has really told us about.
I've never heard this
Right?
before.
Yeah.
I'm interested.
I know. The same way the clitoris was just found.
Right. We discovered massive
Yes,
components of the
yes.
clitoris and 2 desire arousal stages. What are they called?
2 different desire styles.
Desire
and
styles.
The more recent research is actually showing that there's 4 different arousal styles.
Oh my goodness.
So so this is where
Buckle up, ladies.
I know. It's so nuanced, and that's why people
Yeah.
think, oh, we love each other. It should just happen.
Yeah.
Why aren't it should just be natural and
Natural.
organic, right?
Yeah, it's
There's
not.
so many elements and components that are going into this, and it's
Yeah.
multifaceted and it's just so many things. So the 2 different styles of desire, and unfortunately, in our society, we are only shown one, right?
Oh, okay.
In movies, media, music, right? The one that we typically see is what we refer to as spontaneous desire. desire. Spontaneous desire is when we have the mental, emotional wanting of sex first.
Okay.
And then we have that physical, physiological response to that desire, right?
Yes.
And it can kind of seem simultaneous, right?
Yeah.
So people with spontaneous desire, these are the people that tend to initiate sex more often because it's just more so in the forefront of their mind. That's the way that they're wired, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
However, this is only about half of people.
Interesting.
The other half of people experience the exact opposite. And we call it responsive desire. Responsive desire is when we need the physical, physiological arousal first, and then the mental, emotional wanting of sex comes after. Right?
Yes. Fascinating.
I know.
Wait, I have a question.
Yes, please.
Is there, so you said it's about half and half.
Sure.
Is it like
Yes.
men tend to be this and
Yes.
women tend to be this?
Yes.
Oh, tell us.
I'm sure you can guess.
I need to know. Yeah. So I would guess men would be the first one.
Yes.
Where they have that mental, emotional desire first,
Yes.
and then almost simultaneously the physical arousal.
Yes.
And they're more pursuing.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So, and it's not a hard and fast rule, right? And
Sure.
I can't remember the exact statistics because,
There's a lot of numbers out there. Yeah.
a lot of
they're
numbers.
always changing.
But I
Yep.
really kind of feel like it's like a 60-40 thing. Don't quote me. But
Yep.
because I know plenty of women that have spontaneous desire, and I know plenty of men that have
Sure.
responsive desire.
Oh, okay.
And that's
Yeah.
actually some of the more difficult cases because with men in society, men are expected to just turn on, right?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so sometimes after pregnancy, when women are starting to feel a little bit more comfortable in their body, or they're starting to allow themselves to explore their body a little bit more, right? They might walk in front of their partner, and if their partner is not responding to them, then they feel like there's something wrong, right? But
Oh,
maybe
yeah,
he has more of
yeah.
that responsive desire where he needs actual stimulation, right?
Yeah.
So
that's a good
responsive
point.
desire, when we're talking about that physiological arousal first, we have to take into consideration that these aren't the people that are initiating sex because it's not
Okay.
on the forefront of their mind.
Yep.
But these are the people that either during sex or after sex say, wow, that was great. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I don't want
Yep.
that more often, right? And it's
Interesting.
responsive because we are responding to a moment, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So these people are, and I also have responsive desire, so I very
Okay.
much
Yeah, empathize.
understand
Uh-huh.
where it's like, I have to allow myself to be open, right? So
okay.
responsive desire actually starts from a place of willingness, not wanting. Yeah.
I like that.
And that's kind of hard to kind of wrap our minds around.
Yes, I
right?
can see that.
Because everything in our society tells us that if you don't want sex, you shouldn't have sex. Right.
That's such a good point.
But we still
Yeah.
have to uphold that to a certain standard,
Yes,
right? Because
yes.
again, going back to sexual trauma, right? 1 in 3 women, 1 in 6 men.
Yeah.
Tough, but if we're talking about the context of a committed, loving relationship, right?
Sure, yeah.
Then I have to allow myself to learn when or where I might have a little bit more energy, right? Or,
yes.
I don't have as many things on my mind, right? Or I actually create the time and space for me to disconnect from the things
Yeah.
so that I can allow myself to get in touch with my body.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
Like check out of our mind so that we can check
Yes.
into our body.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that.
And that is absolutely necessary for people with responsive desire.
Well, I think even bringing awareness to this, Rachel, is massive.
Yes.
Because I
So
know
important.
women, whether they're my patients, other therapists, or my friends, who will say things like that.
Yeah.
Like, he just doesn't understand. I'm just not in the mood.
Yep.
So if they become aware
Yes.
that they are responsive,
Yes.
and if they just create space and willingness,
Yes.
they could engage in different levels of intimacy that we're going to learn about.
Exactly. Yes.
And then they could, in response, have an arousal, a desire, and then an arousal, and
Yep.
enjoy
Absolutely.
intimacy
Absolutely.
with their partner.
Yep. Yep.
Oh, that's
but
huge.
we need to know what we like to enjoy.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Because the key aspect of desire is that if I'm not liking or enjoying the sex that I'm having, then why would I want it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Right.
Yes.
And so that's where it gets a little difficult because then it's like, okay, I understand that I have to be open, right? But what am I being open to?
Right, right,
And what
absolutely.
is coming with this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And if I don't feel like it's going to be pleasurable or fulfilling, then I'm going to close myself off to it anyway,
Oh, goodness.
And
And how many women do we know?
Yes.
They just check out.
yeah.
I mean, I've been through phases of like that myself too.
Yeah.
You're just, like you said, you've got kids, you work, you're
Yes.
exhausted.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
anything after that feels like a responsibility or, oh, I better do this. And if you don't know, or if like you're almost creating a new path in my brain, like a pathway of this could still be a fun experience if you understand that your mental and physical faculties will get on board.
Exactly. And most of the women, when I explain this to them, they can kind of go back in their memory and be like, actually, you know what?
Yeah.
That does happen, or that has happened, right? Yeah. But this difficulty with these time constraints, right, as you were kind of explaining to your patients of, you know, we need about 20 minutes for full arousal, right? Because the clitoris, so don't mind my fluff.
She needs to be sewn up just a little bit.
I know. I actually have a new one, but she doesn't serve me in the same way.
Yeah, there you go.
So if we're thinking about full arousal, right, you're talking about, you know, the vaginal walls and how it tense, right?
Yep.
So what we need to understand is that the clitoris also becomes aroused, right? So if I'm looking at the clitoris and it becomes aroused, what does that look like?
Yeah. It is so comparable to a penis.
Exactly.
It's wild.
It's
just most of it is hidden.
Yeah. We have all the same parts. They're arranged in different ways. That's from Dr. Emily Nagoski. Her book, Come As You Are, is just
highly
my
recommend.
favorite. My favorite.
Highly recommend.
So when we're talking about the need for our body to experience full arousal, because if we don't, then we're not able to access the pleasure that's available to us, right? So if we're just saying, well, I have kids, I don't have time, right? What do you mean I need 20 minutes?
Right. It's laughable.
So it's unfortunate because then you're doing yourself a disservice, right?
Yes.
So then you're not having enjoyable sex because your body literally isn't primed and ready for it. Right. And so then it's like, well, I'm not enjoying the sex that I'm having, so I don't want it. So then it becomes this really vicious like feedback loop of just not understanding because we don't have the proper education for it, and not giving ourselves the opportunity to create these spaces within ourselves and within our relationships.
100%. Yeah.
And I think that's really the challenge, to help women and couples understand. And I feel like men are tapped into this a little bit more, but the way that they communicate this to their partners might get a little sticky, right? Because then women are starting to feel that duty and that obligation of, you see, all you want is this. Right? Yeah. But when we understand that actually this is for me too.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
And some of the most incredible research that's happening, and the thought leaders in the industry are talking about how women need to actually be more like narcissists in the bedroom.
Interesting. Tell me more about that. Do tell.
So it's more about claiming our desire. Right.
Okay.
And realizing that we are worthy and deserving of that experience as well. Right.
Yes.
There's an incredible sex therapist out of New York. I think Steven Snyder is his name. And his book is called Love Worth Making or something like that. I'll give you the resource. Okay. But when I was reading this book, he was referring to our sexual self. What he says is that our sexual self never really grows up. Right? Our sexual self remains a toddler.
Interesting.
So if we think about toddlers.
I know them well.
Yes.
Yeah.
What are their temperaments like, Dr. Kat?
Well, Rachel.
Yeah.
I would categorize toddlers as highly inconsistent, kind of psychopathic.
Sure.
Like 1 minute they're super happy and the next minute they're angry at the world.
Yep.
And tiny little nuances can throw off their moment.
Yes.
And you know what? They also recover real quick.
Yes.
They'll pitch a fit.
Yeah.
And then in like 5 minutes sort of peter out. And then they're up and playing.
Yep.
Like nothing ever happened, which brings me to use that word psychopath.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, are we cool? Are you good?
Are we good? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Let me give you some space.
4 seconds ago, the world was over because I gave you the yellow cup and not the red cup.
Right.
Even though you asked me for the yellow cup.
Exactly. Yeah, but I didn't know what I wanted.
Right. Yes.
Until it actually happened. And then I realized that actually I don't want this yellow cup. I want this red cup.
So sneaky. I see the link there. I'm on to you. Okay.
Right.
All right.
And they're learning their own autonomy. Right?
Yes.
They want to do something, right?
They do. Yeah.
And they don't really care about what anybody else wants or thinks.
Correct.
Right?
100%.
Mine
Yeah.
and no.
Yeah.
Right?
I love that.
So
That is a fabulous parallel. Your sexual self is a toddler.
yes. Yeah. Let's really
I'm going to use that.
take that into consideration.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can't
Yeah.
force it. You can't force your toddler to really do
cannot.
anything, right? You want to give it options. Do you want A or do you want B?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Let's see.
What shirt do you want to wear
Right.
today?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so we have to create that space and give them that space, right, to decide.
Okay.
If
Okay.
I feel like there's only one option here
Mm-hmm.
and that's not the option that I want, then I'm going to close myself off to it.
Oh, okay. So like
Yeah.
back to intimacy.
Exactly.
If penetrative
Yep.
intercourse equals being intimate with my partner.
Exactly.
And I don't like it.
Nope.
Then I'm just going to be like, no intimacy.
Don't even touch me.
Got it.
Right.
Yes.
And the women that I work with, and I think this is, very common. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not just being that touched out, right? But it's also if I've equated physical touch with sexual intercourse,
Yes. Yeah.
right? Then I'm going to block any type of physical intimacy because I think that it equates to sexual intimacy,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. I had a patient, she had significant pain with intercourse. She had medical trauma from pap smears and that kind of thing. And she postpartum could not have intercourse with her husband. And I remember after the second or third session, they were successful, but it was like she could only keep her pelvic floor relaxed for about 2 or 3 days after working with us, and then it would tighten up. And so one of the pieces of advice I gave her was, just play with each other.
Yeah.
Just have a play date. Just have space. Like, if you're successful for those 2 or 3 days, great. Have penetrative intercourse.
Yeah.
But after that,
Exactly.
be kids again. Be
Yes.
playful. Be naked. Like, do all kinds of stuff. Like, that does
Exactly.
not have to be the end all be all, because she
Exactly.
did start saying what you're saying.
Right.
Like, I just don't even want him to touch me,
Right.
because I know it might lead to that.
Exactly.
And if I can't, I'm a failure. And then I feel like cockadoo and I don't want to go there again.
Yep. And
Yeah.
that's where we really have to expand our
Yes.
perspective and our approach to intimacy.
Yeah.
Right.
Big
And we
time.
have to recognize that. I mean, if we're going from this very linear, rigid way of thinking about intimacy, right? Intimacy equals sex, sex equals intercourse. If I have intercourse, it has to end in an orgasm.
Right. Yeah.
Where even taking the orgasm out of it, right? I can have intercourse without having an orgasm, but I can still have a really lovely, wonderful time with my partner.
Right.
It can still be pleasurable and connecting even without that little cherry on top.
Right. That's massive permission.
Yes.
I don't
Yes.
know of many people who don't put that pressure on themselves.
But it's that pressure that constricts us, right? It's
Yes.
the pressure that creates the tension.
Right.
So then
Yeah.
If we're looking for that release, we're not going to get the release.
Right,
Because
right.
we're so wound up in this idea.
Oh my goodness.
Right.
All right. So what would you say is the first step
First step.
for a woman in this situation? Like, say
Yes.
she's listening to this and she's like, me,
Yes.
this is me.
Yes.
I don't pursue my partner.
Yep.
I don't really think I'm interested until we're halfway through the warm-up phase. And then I'm like, oh, okay, here we go. Like, what would be a recommendation for her?
So I think this is where communication is really important, right? If we're able to talk about our sexual experience and talk about our sexual relationship, then it helps us to be more comfortable even within the bedroom or wherever it is that you're being sexual, right? However, this can be a really, really uncomfortable conversation for couples to have, right? Because most couples aren't talking about their sexual relationships, right?
Yep.
And so this is where we kind of have to take a little bit of a different approach, right?
Okay.
So we don't want it to feel like a boardroom, right? We actually don't want to sit here and maintain eye contact, right? Because eye contact is like, now you're really seeing me, and now I don't know, I'm going to see your reactions, and I don't know if I'm going to like your reactions, and so I'm going to avoid this, right?
Interesting.
So I like to recommend for my couples to either go on a walk and talks, right?
Ooh.
So you're walking side by side. You're not necessarily having to really, eye gaze, right?
Fair.
And so it's more casual, more comfortable. Tone and timing are essential, right?
Okay.
So do you actually have the time to have this conversation? Or are you just passing, trying to get words out while you're doing all the other responsibilities? That's not going to work, right?
Yep.
So let's go for a walk, even if you're walking the dogs, right?
Okay.
And let's talk about, let's just open up the conversation is really what we want to do, right?
Yeah.
So when we're opening up the conversation, I like to take a sandwich approach.
Love
Are you
it.
familiar with the sandwich?
So when you say sandwich,
Yes.
I think about, say, like if you're giving someone feedback,
Yes.
you're going to do a compliment,
Yes.
then the feedback, and then, and I love you and a compliment.
Yeah.
Best man in the world. Thank you.
Exactly.
Okay.
So prior to my private practice, I was managing a team and working with HR. They're like, oh, you just got to sandwich it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then as I really got into this work, I was like, you know what, maybe we can use that, but kind of modify it a little bit, right?
Okay. Yep.
So my sandwich, we're going to start with the first layer. We're going to talk about something that we really liked, loved, and enjoyed. Right?
Perfect.
And
okay.
it would be wonderful if couples can have this conversation, I would say within 24 to 48 hours of the last sexual experience.
Oh,
Because
okay.
if you go too long, then you might forget. Right? Life
Interesting.
happens
Yeah,
and
that's
there's too
great.
many things. And I might not remember all of kind of the details and the nuances that are actually really important
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
Right? Like you stroked me in this way versus this way. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I actually really like this way. But then days later, it's all the same.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so this is where if we can kind of open up this conversation a day or two later, right, then we're really catching it so that we're really learning from each
Yeah,
other,
that
right?
makes sense.
And so you can open up the conversation by saying, hey, babe, I was just thinking about our experience last night, right? And I really loved this part of it, right? I really loved the way that you kissed me here, or I thought the foreplay that we were doing was amazing, and I really loved this position. Right?
Yep.
So you can get into, and if you are actually having a really hard time identifying something, right? It's just looking for maybe the smallest something, right?
Sure,
If we're just
yeah.
kind of getting this ball rolling, right? And it really does turn into a really beautiful snowball if you allow it, right? So we got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I really loved being touched in this way, right? Then the next layer is just something that didn't work for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you phrase it like that?
So we phrase it in a way of, but when we switched to this position, it was actually a little painful,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
When we started to when things started to get even more hot and heavy, it got really fast. And I actually needed it to be a little bit slower so that I could really be in that moment, right? So we're not saying, ugh, I don't know how many times I have to tell you that I don't like this thing.
Yeah. Yep.
Right?
Said none of us
Right,
ever.
right. Yeah. So we don't
Yeah.
want to be critical, judgmental. We don't
Yeah.
want to put our partners down, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the quickest way to experience defensiveness, right?
that
Your
makes
partner's going to
sense.
close off. They're not going to hear you,
Right, right.
And so in order for our partners to be receptive, right, we have to take a gentle approach, even if
Yeah.
we've said this a million times.
Sure. Yeah.
But the 5 times you probably said it before, was it in a way that was constructive or was it in a way that was critical?
Right. Or was it too far from the
Right.
event and
That-
they don't really coordinate it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So let's just kind of rewind really quickly. The number one rule of sexual communication is that you're not talking about or giving feedback about the experience in the same place that you're being sexual.
Ooh, that's
Yes.
good information.
Yes.
Is there a reason behind
Yes.
that?
Yes. Because if there's anything that can be construed as negative, then we start to develop a negative association with that space.
Got it.
So we want to remove ourselves, right? And
Okay.
so we can go and sit down on the couch, right? And we can stare at the TV maybe, right? And just kind of, talk, or we can go for a walk, right? But we
Yeah.
want to remove ourselves from that environment. And I'm not saying that in the middle of the sexual experience, you can of course say harder, softer,
Right,
faster,
yes.
slower, left, right. Obviously,
Yeah.
yes, that's
The keep
absolutely
goings,
okay,
yes, you
right?
have to be able to say that.
And
yeah.
we need I say obviously, it's not obvious, right? Because a lot of people, women especially, struggle with that sexual voice,
Right,
right? And
right.
being able to claim what it is that we want, right?
Yes.
Because our bodies, unfortunately, have been just kind of, objectified in a lot of different ways.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
Even if you personally haven't experienced that, which
Right.
I mean, thank God I've never been molested or raped or anything like
no,
that.
it doesn't even have to do with that.
But you see
Right.
objectivity
Yes.
out in the world,
Right.
even in other people who are physically present
Yes.
with you. And it is.
And if we're talking generationally, right?
Yeah.
The clitoris wasn't found or published until the early 2000s. And so
Yeah.
then my pleasure doesn't matter.
right.
Right.
Yes.
And, if we're talking about also kind of religious and other societal messages of, we are here to serve
Yes.
our husbands,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's not about me. It's about them and their pleasure. So I'm just supposed
Yeah.
to kind of lay here and just kind of take it.
Right.
right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so now that paradigm is shifting, and we need to kind of develop some language around it so that we can introduce, hey, you know, I was thinking, can we try this thing, right?
Yeah.
And men are actually really craving that type of feedback,
Really?
right? Men
Interesting.
really do want to please us. Most men.
Fascinating. Tell me more about that.
We can't do a blanket, right?
Right.
But of course, he wants
Yeah.
it to be a good experience and a pleasurable experience for both, right? Like that's the whole, it's unfortunate. And this is even going back to Come As You Are, where, you know, she talks about how men societally, the only way that they really feel and experience that connection is through sex, unfortunately, right? The way that we're conditioned. So he feels connection in that way. And he wants you to, like, they can tell when you're checked out.
Yes.
And it's not enjoyable for them either.
I would understand that. Yeah.
Right. So that's where it's like, let's help them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's help them so you can help yourself. Right. And then it becomes a wonderful, magical, synergistic experience. Right.
Yeah.
So we're going to go through the sandwich. We're going to say, I really loved when you touched me here or touched me in that way. And it was so fantastic. But, you know, it got a little fast at one point, and I kind of disconnected, or this position was a little uncomfortable, or you know, I really prefer like a firmer touch. The softer touch is kind of a little too ticklish, right?
Yep.
And then the last layer, instead of just buffering it with something positive, right, we're actually going to be constructive and either offer a suggestion or open it up for collaboration.
Ooh, interesting.
Yes.
A suggestion or collaboration?
Yes.
Okay, so what might that look
So
like?
a suggestion, so next time, do you think that, or, you know, the foreplay just wasn't long enough to where I really wasn't able to get in it, right?
Yeah.
So next time, can we try to create a little bit more space for foreplay? And during that time, can we try X, Y, and Z?
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
And because the idea is that if you have allowed yourself to get to know and explore your own body, right, or you have previous experiences of what you know might feel good, then you can offer that suggestion.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Big
However, we don't know what we don't know.
Yep.
And most people have not allowed themselves to explore sexually because, you know, it's
too many reasons.
too many reasons.
Yes.
The guilt, the shame, the society, the religion, all of the things, right?
Yeah.
So if you haven't had that opportunity to really explore and get to know what it is that you actually want, right, then that's where we can open it up for collaboration of, you know, I was trying to think about what we could do instead, but I'm having a really hard time, you know, coming up with something. Would you want to brainstorm, or would you want to kind of explore what that could look like?
I love that idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I could see how not only are you being successful in communicating your needs,
Right.
but then you're also bringing him into the picture and saying, let's figure this out together.
Yes.
Like, your input matters to me, and your agreement in this situation is important.
Absolutely. And we call it an intimate partner team.
Ooh, I like that. That's
so
awesome.
When it feels like a team, when it feels like, you know, like we're working on this and through this together, right?
Yeah.
And for moms, our bodies go through massive transformations,
So many
right?
changes,
Massive. And so those hot spots that were maybe there prior to pregnancy, whether it was pregnancy 1 or 2 or 3, right, might be very different.
Totally.
And so then it's really allowing ourselves to continue to explore and engage in a way that's fun and with no real expectation other than pleasure, right?
Yeah.
If we really learn to take the goal out of sex, right?
Yep.
And recognize that sex is just a way to play, right? And a way for us to experience pleasure and connection in whatever way that looks like, then we can really allow ourselves to explore the different changes that might be happening, right?
I love
Sex
that.
is not set it and forget it, right?
Right.
And especially if I met my partner 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, right? Even 5 years ago, even 2 years ago, especially if there was a pregnancy in between, right? That I have to allow myself to explore and recognize that it's not a burden, that this one thing is no longer the thing.
Yeah. We have to evolve. There's no other way.
Exactly. And that's a part of the play. That's a part of the fun of it, right? That exploration. And when we can get back to that pleasure, then we tend to be a little bit more open.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, I love all of this. This is so helpful. Okay, so already we have permission to have different arousal and desire conditions. We have a conversation that we can have with our partner about what we do like, what could be better, and how we're going to collaborate to improve. Let's talk about your girl here.
Yeah.
And orgasms and how that relates to arousal, desire, and like what we can give these women to maximize their experiences.
Yes. Well, I would love to hear what you talk to your women about in terms of orgasms and to help elevate that.
Yeah. So thank you for that. I would say typically when we discuss and usually we have either postpartum women or pathology. So pain with intercourse, inability to have intercourse, painful orgasms, or lack of orgasm. So let's say for lack of orgasm, we would recommend any resensitization. So these are strategies we'd use with patients who have strokes and they literally cannot sense their arm. You would start with light touch, maybe use a washcloth and reintroduce different textures and pressures. Sensations. And we expect the brain to start to reconnect with that.
Yes.
So we would give them, permission to explore their physicality.
Right.
Do you feel more calm and relaxed when you massage your own inner thighs?
Yes.
When you place your hand on your vulva?
Yes.
When you are exploring the spaces intravaginally? When you can maybe come near the clitoris?
Yes.
Because a lot of women will be like, I don't even like to touch, for anyone to touch my clitoris.
Correct.
Like it's so sensitive.
Yes.
So we encourage them to say, I don't like that touch yet.
Right.
Same with nipples. Like sometimes it'd be way too sensitive and they're like, no, especially breastfeeding.
Yes.
So we invite them to reconnect with touch if they do not have orgasm. We'll assess their pelvic floor, see if it's tight, if it's weak. And also I like to point out too, weak can mean like in the moment it doesn't have a good strength. It also can talk about musculature that's just thin. Like it's so not plump and structurally sound.
Right.
Not to bring in a gross topic, but when we were doing cadaver lab in PT school, we have bodies of people who donated to science, said, here, you can just take this whole vessel that I lived in and cut it up and learn from it.
Yeah.
And we would have, they were mainly elderly, we would have musculature that we could barely appreciate with that scalpel because they're like so thin. It was like a piece of lunch meat roast beef. I'm like, this is the entire bicep? Like, what?
Yeah.
And so when you're assessing the pelvic floor, you can really tell when it's like thick, robust, healthy musculature that has bulk and blood flow and capacity versus if it's like this weak little beep.
Right.
And you're like, okay, well, it's there.
But what helps it to get there? What helps it to get like plump and robust?
Yeah. Repetition, strengthening, length. It can't get robust and strong if it's too tight.
Right.
You can't contract it.
Exactly.
So we typically take them through a process depending on what they show us at the eval, lengthening, strengthening, positions. I mean, sometimes the pelvic bones are just not in the right place. So the muscles are being tweaked.
Right.
And then control.
Yeah.
They're controlling those muscles. They're voluntary.
Yeah.
It's not your heart.
Right.
It's not your digestive system. Your pelvic floor, you are operating that.
Yes.
So you might not think, okay, pelvic floor tighten because I'm really annoyed because the water's boiling and the phone's ringing and this kid won't stop pulling on my leg. You don't tell it that.
Right.
But in that moment,
exactly,
you're saying, I'm not safe to relax. Right. So the pelvic floor goes, shoop.
Yep.
Tighten
exactly. Up. Exactly.
Yeah.
That safe to relax.
Yeah.
Is everything.
Right?
Everything.
Yeah.
Right? Because even in terms of touch, that if I'm overwhelmed and overstimulated and my partner goes to touch me, right? Yeah. My first reaction might be to flinch.
Yep.
Right? Because
and
if
they don't
we're
like that.
No. Absolutely not.
It's not really what
Absolutely
they're looking
not.
for. Yeah.
No. But if we are, if we allow ourselves to find that ease and that rest, because when we're in that survival mode, right?
Yeah.
I mean, biologically, nothing else matters, right?
Yeah.
Reproduction doesn't matter.
No.
It's just I have to stay alive.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
And so in our society, when we're so revved up and there's so many things that are vying for our attention and so many responsibilities and all the roles that we have, right? We're not giving ourselves that time to find rest in a safe, relaxing way. Right. So I very much encourage the women that I work with to give themselves moments of transition. Right.
Yeah.
And this is something that the partners are also, it's important for the partners to know.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Where, okay, if you want to have some sexy time later, right? And that might not mean intercourse, right? I can have sex in a lot of different ways. It doesn't necessarily include intercourse, right?
Yeah.
Again, we're zooming out of this pigeonhole.
Beautiful.
Right. So if mom needs some time to decompress, then dad, maybe you can go and help with bedtime, right?
Yeah.
Or help start to put lunches together for tomorrow.
Wash those
right?
dishes.
It's like really taking a look. And this is where it can get tough, right? Because some couples watching might be like, oh, I've tried to ask, but then they're saying, I've also been at work all day and I'm also exhausted and I'm also contributing around the household. What more do you want me to do? I'm tired too, right?
Right.
Okay, well then it no longer becomes a team.
Yes. Yeah. Because you're
Right.
both just looking out for yourselves.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So that's where the couples counseling
Yes, I was going to say. Yeah, it sounds like we just need help.
comes into it, right? Because we have to, feel safe enough in this relationship where I can lower my walls.
Yeah, 100%.
Right?
Yes.
And when I feel that, then it's like, okay, I can rest and then I can receive.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
What you just said is so important. Yeah. Because women are starting to hear the message of, okay, I should speak up for myself.
Yes.
I should ask for what I want.
Yes.
Let's say I had an unfavorable experience in the bedroom.
Right.
I didn't appreciate him.
Right.
I heard on a podcast that I need to create some space for myself. She goes and asks her husband, can you do bedtime tonight so we can have playtime later?
Yeah.
And that's how he responds. I'm tired too. I also need to decompress.
Right.
I worked all day. So then.
Well, she's probably not adding that last part of playtime later.
Okay.
Right.
So you find if she says that, then he might be more receptive to doing bedtime.
Yes, because
Good to
then
know.
I'm helping you, you're helping me.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? It's not just this is what I need, right? But this is what I need in the scope of us.
Yeah. Got it.
Right? And so that's where that dance, it's like it becomes this tug of war. Right? And it's a really terrible tug of war.
Yeah.
Where couples are in this space of, well, I'm not giving you this because you're not giving me that.
Yeah.
Right? Well, I'm not giving you that because you're not giving me this.
Totally.
Right?
Yep.
And so then it's where's that slack in that rope and how are we going to create slack in that rope?
Yeah.
Right? And so what I explain to my couples is that both partners have to be willing to take that one small step outside of their comfort zone or outside of their needs towards the other to accommodate for the other's needs.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But it only works if both partners are willing and committed to doing that. Right? Because if we're really thinking about a real game of tug of war,
Yes.
right? Then if one partner says, okay, I'll make a little concession and the other partner is still tugging,
Yeah. You're going to
then
fall
both
down.
go down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So this is where we really have to get on the same page in terms of, okay, this is the common goal that we are working towards together.
I can see that.
Right?
Yeah.
But that's also where some couples get stuck, right? Because one might have one ideal, the other might have another ideal.
Yeah.
And they're not always able to see how they're actually very much connected.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you kind of feel like, where do we go from here?
Where do we go from here? Right?
Okay. So let's say
Yes.
there's a mom who she's feeling connected, the desire is there, the arousal's there, and her orgasms are not great.
Yeah.
We've done the physical therapy things,
Yeah.
the stretching, the exercising, the neurological calming.
Yes.
And there's a disconnect.
Yes.
Is there anything else, another tip or strategy you could offer for her?
So, okay, so we're having a conversation around what feels good and what doesn't feel good in those moments, right? And we actually have to be playing that out. Right?
Okay. Yep.
And we have to find that safe, relaxed space, right? Because from that point of tension, if we're not able to let go, I mean, orgasms are literally the release, right? And so I work with a lot of women who are, high power
Yeah. Yep.
entrepreneurs, high on corporate ladders that
We don't like to let go.
Nope. We have to be in control
Yeah. Yep.
all the time.
Yeah.
Right. And so this idea of actually letting go in this moment is a whole other component to it.
That
Right?
makes so much sense, Rachel, because there are times where from our perspective, everything is lining up to where at least it should be getting better.
Right.
But so it's like similar to birth, where it's a surrender experience. You have to allow.
Exactly.
You can't make it happen, but you can make it welcome.
Yeah. You can't force an orgasm.
Yeah, you really can't.
You just cannot.
Nope.
Right. So we have to think about orgasms like sleep. Right.
Okay.
If I think I was sleeping, I probably wasn't sleeping.
Yeah.
Right. If
So
I
great.
think I had an orgasm, probably didn't have an orgasm.
Right. Yep.
Right.
Yeah, you should really know.
And so it's in that moment, like you can't force yourself to sleep.
Yes.
Right. You have to allow sleep in.
Yes.
Right. You have to allow yourself, your body, your mind to ease. Right. To find that rest and relaxation so that I can
Transition into
Yeah.
sleep. Yeah.
It's the same thing with orgasm.
That makes so much sense.
Right.
So much
And so
sense.
if I'm so focused again on this specific outcome,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And this is where it's tough, right? Because it's so cliche,
Uh-huh.
so cliche,
Uh-huh.
but it is so relevant to our sexual self
Yeah.
that it really is not about the destination,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's
the whole
literally the whole ride,
Yeah.
the whole ride.
I
Right.
hear that.
And if I'm so focused on this is what has to happen, and this happens for men as well.
Oh,
Right?
absolutely. Yeah.
So it's not just women, right?
Right.
When we talk about sexual anxieties, and I refrain from saying performance anxieties because then we're reinforcing this idea that sex is a performance. Sex is not a performance,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
That if we think of it as a performance, then it's a pass fail,
Oh my goodness.
right?
So true.
And so then if I'm stuck in this pass fail, if I fail, then as you were saying before, right?
Yeah.
I feel like,
Let down, a disappointment.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm broken
Yep.
in so many
Oh, yeah.
ways, right?
Yeah.
So if I allow myself to really focus on pleasure,
Yeah.
right? And I love how you were talking about that the word?
Resensitization. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Right? Because then we get accustomed to different sensations, right? And we can start to identify the sensations that feel good,
I love that.
right?
Yeah.
And so then it's like, okay, I'm just exploring what feels good, right?
Yeah.
Let's allow this to be a pursuit of pleasure,
Right.
not a pursuit of
Right.
an orgasm.
Oh, I love that.
Yes.
That's a very important distinction.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's like, on the one hand, it is okay to want to have an orgasm. Like, it's
Yes.
okay to desire that
Yes.
and work towards that.
Yes, but you can't force it.
You can't force it. So to just take that pressure off
Yes.
and be like, this will become a natural consequence
Yes.
of the process
Yes.
of learning your own pleasure paths
Yep.
and having your partner collaborate with you on that
Exactly.
adventure.
Exactly.
That can make a world of difference.
A world of
for
difference.
these women.
Yes. Yes.
And so, as far as if a woman is successful with having orgasms and it's just not what it used to be or what she knows it could be,
Yeah.
and we get this a lot postpartum.
Yeah.
From our perspective, we talk about maybe the tissues are not healthy hormonally.
Sure.
So we might ask her to talk to her doctor about estrogen levels, that kind of path.
Great.
We can talk to her about having moisturized tissue versus lubricated tissue. So her vaginal space should have a level of moisture,
Yes.
just like our mouth always has a level of moisture.
Yes.
But when I eat, I salivate.
Yes.
Like I really have extra fluid in my mouth to break
Sure.
down that food.
Yeah.
When we're aroused, we should have extra fluid.
Sure.
So we check on those markers. And then we can also talk about bulking up the pelvic floor.
Yeah.
Maybe she went through a time of atrophy
Right.
from a muscular perspective.
Exactly.
So having patience with a strengthening program that's appropriate for her
Yes.
can really take her orgasms to the next level
Yes.
or just where she knows they could or should be.
Yeah.
Do you have anything from a sex therapist perspective?
So I just want to go back to talk about your permission of allowing women to explore their bodies,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
right? Because if you don't know
Yeah.
what type of touch, right? And I mean, again, we were talking about, maybe one lip is bigger or more sensitive than the other, right?
Yeah.
If we're talking about the inner labia versus the outer labia, right? And even our clitoris might be more sensitive on one side versus the other side, right? So if we're not giving ourselves the opportunity to really explore what that is, then how can we really kind of optimize or tap into that full range of pleasure? Yeah. And then the other part of it, and that I love that you talk about, is this atrophy, right?
Yes.
And I tell my clients, if you don't use it, you lose it, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So if it's been months, years since you have been engaging in any type of penetration, right? Or exploring your body in terms of arousal and orgasm, right? Then those tissues, those muscles are just not going to be able to sustain, right?
Right.
And then I think that last part that you were talking about in terms of that lubrication, this is also, I think, where there's some misconceptions, right? Where it's like, oh, I get wet on my own, it's all good, right?
Yes.
However, right, the lubrication comes from the vagina, right? The vagina is self-lubricating. The clitoris is not. Right. So I recommend for my couples to always use lube, regardless of how much vaginal lubrication is happening, because we want to be able to create as much like slickness and smoothness on the clitoris, right? So that it's not, we don't experience that kind of friction.
Right.
It has so many nerve endings that it's going to be hypersensitive to any type of like, oh, and then that creates the tension.
Right? So true.
So lubrication is so important. I love just coconut oil, right? Organic coconut oil, fractionated coconut oil. That way it's not, you're not chunking.
Absolutely.
But if you're using condoms, obviously, condoms do not sustain oil-based lubes, right? So then you want to find a really wonderful water-based lube that can be helpful as well. And so lubrication is so, so important. Actually, I think back to the numbers, right? I think it's about 80% of women report a higher rate of orgasm with the use of lubrication.
Wow. That's a big percentage.
That's a big percentage.
We've actually switched from asking our patients, do you use lubrication, to which lubrication do you use?
Perfect.
To just normalize it. And we always recommend have it on hand. Put a little bit, even if you think you don't need it. And just see what happens. A little bit. And it's not, so a little bit, you want to just kind of graze over the clitoris, right? And also the inner and outer labia. Right. It's not just where the penetration is happening. Absolutely.
Right? Because
the whole organ is experiencing.
The whole vulva needs that kind of love as well.
Yes. Oh my gosh, Rachel.
I know.
This was so fantastic. I learned a tremendous amount.
As did I.
And I've been in the sexual health world for a decade. So this was magic. Thank you so much for your time.
It is my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. If anyone is listening and they're like, I need more of this. Where can they find you?
InfiniteIntimacyTherapy.com. My social handles are Infinite Intimacy Therapy. I have online courses for women, sensual women, and sensual mamas for my new moms that kind of go over a lot of this information, but the worksheets and workbooks that come with it. It's basically like having me in your back pocket with all of the questions. That I'm really proud of the workbooks, because I took time to really think about the questions that I ask my clients. And so it gives you an opportunity to really kind of self-reflect with specific exercises that will help you to get in touch and access this part of yourself a little bit more. And I also have private retreats for couples.
That's right.
And it is exclusive to the couple to really find that immersive space, because again, we're talking about so much noise and so much stuff that's getting in the way of actually taking that time and space. And so 1, 2, or 3 days, we're able to take these deep dives that really just reset the relationship. So I'm so excited for all of these, offerings, because it's so important, as you were talking about. And this is the one thing that we didn't touch on specifically, right? Where we can address the physical, physiological, we can address the mental, emotional, right? And I think in our society, if we go back to like the 80s and Jane Fonda and like, we got to get fit, right? Perfect.
Yeah.
And now it's only in the last decade that we're saying mental emotional health is really important, right?
You're right.
I think that third wave, which we're not there yet, but I think we're going to get there. We're going to get there, is our relationship health.
Oh, I'm so glad you say that. I hope so.
Yes, because our relationships, just as much as our mental, emotional, and our physical, right? Our relationships very much dictate and influence our overall well-being, right? And our quality of life. It's a quality of life issue.
100%.
Right? So
when the Twin Towers were going down, did anybody inside call their accountant?
No.
And say, hey, this is my last day on earth? No. If anything hits the fan, you call your people.
You call your
like
people.
Your partner, your mom, your sister. Yeah.
And
that
so
is what
that relationship, right? Where you can get in touch with your body, you can learn what it is that's helpful for you. You can learn how to communicate that to your partner.
Yeah.
But the other aspect that we didn't dive into as much, which is where the bulk of my work really comes in, is helping the couple really find that safe space with each other.
Yes.
Right.
And we're going to do that next time.
Yeah.
Totally. Because that is important.
Yeah. Because I can, Dr. Kat, I did all my exercises, right? Okay, Rachel, I explored my body. But you know what? I asked my partner this one thing. I asked him to take out the trash. You didn't take out the trash. And now I'm annoyed.
Yeah.
And so now I'm going to clam up again.
Yeah.
Right. So
we need so
there's,
much help.
It's so layered and so nuanced. And this is just kind of scratching the surface. And I hope that it was just as helpful for you as it was for me to learn about the physiological components, because the synergy is amazing.
It's everything.
Yeah.
Thank you again for being here. We are so honored that you joined us.
Yes.
And let us know what your comments are. Appreciate you guys. Bye.
Take the next step towards a pain-free pregnancy. Schedule your free 15-minute consult at painlesspregnancy.com. Like, share, and subscribe for more empowering episodes.